A little boy stops a billionaire CEO and says, "Hey sir, this photo of my mum fell out your pocket." The grand Christmas charity gala at St. Mary's Children's Hospital sparkled with festive lights and hopeful dreams. Snowflakes danced outside the towering windows as wealthy donors mingled in their finest attire, champagne glasses clinking amidst discussions of generous donations and corporate responsibility. Edward Holt stood apart from the crowd, his tailored tuxedo and commanding presence drawing subtle glances. At 45, he was one of the city's most powerful figures, yet he felt oddly disconnected from the warmth around him. His fingers absently traced the edge of the worn photograph he always carried in his wallet, a reminder of what he'd lost in his relentless pursuit of success. Then came the sound that would change everything, a small gasp, followed by the clatter of a plastic donation box hitting the marble floor. Through the sea of designer gowns and pressed suits, Edward saw a young boy collapse. The child couldn't have been more than 8, dressed in clothes that spoke of careful mending and limited means. Something about his face, even in distress, struck a chord deep within Edward's memory. "Charlie," a woman's voice cut through the startled murmurs of the crowd. Edward froze, his heart stuttering at the familiar tone. Before he could process why it affected him so deeply, his feet were already moving, pushing through the gathering onlookers. As he reached the boy, time seemed to slow. The child's small hand clutched something, a photograph, worn and creased from frequent handling. It fluttered to the floor as paramedics rushed forward, and Edward caught a glimpse that sent his world tilting on its axis. The image was one he knew intimately. He carried its twin in his own wallet. A young woman with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile, captured in a moment of pure joy beneath an oak tree. Amelia, his Amelia from 15 years ago. "Sir, please step back," a paramedic urged, but Edward couldn't move. The boy's mother pushed through the crowd, and their eyes met across the space between them. Time stopped entirely. Amelia's voice trembled, a mixture of shock and something deeper, as she knelt beside her unconscious son. In that moment, surrounded by the glitter and glamour of a charity gala, 3 lives converged in a way that would unravel everything Edward thought he knew about success, love, and redemption. The photograph lay between them like a bridge across 15 years of silence, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to toll. Edward Holt built his empire on broken promises and shattered relationships, each floor of his gleaming skyscraper marking another sacrifice in his relentless pursuit of power. At 45, he stood at the pinnacle of success, yet the view from his penthouse office felt increasingly hollow with each passing year. His morning routine never varied: Italian suits pressed to perfection, coffee served at precisely 165 degrees, and the Wall Street Journal delivered before sunrise. But the efficiency of his life masked a deeper emptiness, one that echoed through the marble halls of his mansion and the chrome and glass corridors of Holt Industries. 20 years ago, Edward had been different. Fresh out of college, full of dreams that extended beyond profit margins and market shares, he remembered the young man who once sat beneath an oak tree with Amelia, planning a future where success and love could coexist. But ambition had proven a demanding mistress, requiring sacrifices he hadn't understood until it was too late. The photograph in his wallet was his one concession to sentiment. Worn smooth at the edges from years of handling, it showed Amelia in a moment of pure joy, her smile untouched by the pain he would later cause. He told himself he kept it as a reminder of the cost of success, but deep down, he knew it was more. It was his tether to the humanity he'd gradually locked away. His rise to power had been meteoric and merciless. Starting with a small tech startup, he'd leveraged every connection, exploited every weakness, and stepped on countless toes to build Holt Industries into a corporate giant. The business world called him brilliant, his competitors called him ruthless. Both were true, but neither title filled the growing void inside him. Edward's personal assistant, Sarah Mitchell, had worked for him for 15 years. She was probably the closest thing he had to a friend, though he'd never admit it. She watched him drive away 3 marriages, miss countless family events, and slowly isolate himself in his pursuit of more. More money, more power, more control, yet never enough to fill what was missing. The irony wasn't lost on him that his latest project was a children's hospital wing. The board had suggested it for tax purposes and public relations, but something about it stirred memories he'd rather forget. Memories of Amelia's dream to become a teacher, a dream he'd helped destroy with his insistence that she focus on supporting his ambitions instead. His penthouse suite occupied the top 2 floors of the city's most exclusive residential building, yet he spent most evenings in his office. The few times he returned home before midnight, the silence was deafening. Art worth millions adorned his walls, but he couldn't remember the last time he'd really looked at any of it. His wine cellar boasted bottles worth more than some people's homes, yet he drank alone. The business magazines loved to profile him the bachelor billionaire, the corporate shark, the man with the Midas touch. They painted pictures of power and success, never glimpsing the man who sometimes stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows at night, staring at the city below and wondering where it all went wrong. Edward's parents had passed away years ago. His sister rarely spoke to him after a bitter dispute over their inheritance, and his few remaining relatives only surfaced at charity galas or when they needed financial assistance. He told himself it was the price of success, that loneliness was preferable to the messiness of emotional attachments. Yet every Christmas he found himself taking out that photograph, wondering where Amelia was, if she'd found the happiness he'd been too blind to value. The holiday season was particularly difficult, with its emphasis on family and love concepts that had become foreign to him in his single-minded pursuit of success. His daily calendar was a testament to his isolation meetings, acquisitions, conference calls, and charity appearances. No friends, no family dinners, no personal connections beyond those that served his business interests. Even his charitable giving, substantial as it was, felt mechanical, calculated gestures designed to maximize tax benefits and public goodwill. As Edward stood in his office on that fateful evening before the charity gala, straightening his bow tie and checking his appearance one last time, he had no way of knowing that his carefully constructed world was about to crumble. The photograph in his wallet seemed to weigh heavier than usual, as if carrying the weight of 15 years of regret, waiting for the moment when past and present would collide in ways he could never have predicted. Amelia Thompson's world revolved around 2 constants: her son Charlie, and the endless struggle to keep their small family afloat. At 38, her face still held traces of the young woman who once dreamed beneath an oak tree, but life had etched new lines around her eyes, marks of determination rather than defeat. Her daily routine began at 4:30 a.m., brewing coffee in their modest 2-bedroom apartment while preparing Charlie's medications. She'd taken on 3 jobs: teaching assistant at the local elementary school during the day, online tutoring in the evenings, and weekend shifts at a downtown cafe. Every dollar went toward Charlie's medical bills or their looming legal fees. The custody battle had blindsided her. Charlie's paternal grandparents, wealthy and influential, had filed for custody, claiming she couldn't provide adequate care for a child with his medical needs. Their lawyers painted her as a struggling single mother, unable to afford proper treatment, conveniently ignoring the love and dedication that filled their small home. Memories of her past with Edward Holt lingered like shadows in quiet moments. She'd been 23 when they met in college, full of dreams about teaching and making a difference in children's lives. Edward had been brilliant, ambitious, and she thought supportive, until success began to change him, transforming the man she loved into someone who saw her dreams as inconvenient distractions. After their breakup, she'd finished her teaching degree, meeting James Thompson while student teaching at an inner-city school. James worked as a safety inspector for Holt Industries, sharing her passion for helping others. Their love had been gentle and healing, Nothing like the intense ambition that had marked her relationship with Edward. When Charlie came along, their joy seemed complete. Then came the accident at one of Holt Industries' construction sites. James had raised concerns about safety violations, but his reports were ignored. The official investigation ruled it an accident, but Amelia knew better. James had called her that morning, worried about confronting senior management with his findings. It was the last time she heard his voice. Widowed and pregnant, Amelia faced rejection from both families. Her parents, still bitter about her broken engagement to Edward years earlier, offered little support. James's parents blamed her for his death, convinced their son would never have taken such a dangerous job if not for her influence. Charlie was born premature, fighting for life in the NICU. Amelia read to him every day, singing lullabies and promising they would face whatever came together. When his health issues became apparent, she tackled each diagnosis with the same determination, working extra hours and learning everything she could about his condition. Their apartment, though small, radiated warmth. Charlie's artwork covered the walls, bright splashes of color against peeling paint. The kitchen table doubled as her tutoring station in the evenings, textbooks sharing space with medicine bottles and get-well cards from her students. Every surface held memories, photos of James, Charlie's first steps, small victories in their daily battles. The legal threats from Charlie's grandparents arrived monthly, each letter more demanding than the last. They offered to drop the custody suit if she agreed to let them raise him, promising the best medical care money could buy. But Amelia knew what they really wanted: to erase her from Charlie's life, to reshape him into their image of proper society. Her colleagues at school quietly supported her, covering classes when Charlie had medical appointments and organizing fundraisers for his treatments. The cafe owner, a kind-hearted woman named Martha, always sent her home with leftover food and endless encouragement. These small kindnesses kept her going on the hardest days. Still, the weight of it all sometimes felt crushing. Late at night, after Charlie was asleep, Amelia would sit at their small kitchen window, watching the city lights and allowing herself brief moments of worry. The medical bills kept mounting, the legal fees seemed endless, and her 3 jobs barely kept them afloat. But then Charlie would call out in his sleep, and she'd remember why she never gave up. She kept one photograph from her time with Edward, not out of lingering attachment, but as a reminder of how far she'd come. The young woman smiling beneath that oak tree had been naive about love and ambition, but she'd grown into someone stronger. Someone who understood that real success wasn't measured in dollars or power, but in the strength to keep fighting for what truly mattered. Charlie Thompson viewed the world through eyes that held both childhood wonder and an old soul's understanding. At 8 years old, he'd spent more time in hospitals than playgrounds, yet his smile could light up even the dreariest hospital room. His father's photograph sat beside his bed, and though he had no memories of James Thompson, he'd created 1,000 stories about the hero his father must have been. Despite his chronic illness, Charlie approached each day with unwavering optimism. His morning ritual included counting his medications with his mother, turning it into a game to make her smile. Red ones are for courage, he'd declare, blue ones for strength, and white ones for magic. He noticed how his mother's hands sometimes trembled while measuring his doses, so he learned to joke about the bitter taste to ease her worry. His school attendance was sporadic, interrupted by hospital stays and doctor appointments, but Charlie's intelligence shone through. Teachers marveled at his ability to grasp complex concepts despite missing classes. He particularly excelled in art, filling sketchbooks with drawings of the family he dreamed of, not just him and his mom, but a whole extended family he was certain would find them someday. The other children at school sometimes stared at his pale complexion or whispered about his frequent absences, but Charlie had an extraordinary gift for turning potential bullies into friends. "My body's just playing hide and seek with health," he'd explain with a grin that made it impossible not to like him. He became known as the peacemaker on the playground, the one who could solve arguments with wisdom beyond his years. At home, Charlie was acutely aware of his mother's exhaustion, though she tried to hide it. He'd pretend to fall asleep early on nights when she tutored students, knowing she would use the extra time to catch up on bills. Sometimes he heard her crying softly in the kitchen late at night, and he'd pad out in his superhero pajamas, offering hugs that he insisted had special healing powers. The photograph of the young woman under the oak tree fascinated him. He'd found it in an old album and immediately recognized his mother's smile, though she looked different, lighter, unburdened. Charlie kept the photo with him always, believing it held some kind of magic. "You look like a princess in this one, Mum," he'd say, and Amelia would ruffle his hair, her eyes holding secrets he couldn't quite understand. His health condition meant frequent stays in the children's ward, where Charlie became something of a legend. Nurses fought to be assigned to his room, drawn by his storytelling abilities and the way he could make even the sickest children laugh. He organized puppet shows from his hospital bed, using medical gloves as balloons and turning IV poles into enchanted trees. The wealthy grandparents who occasionally visited brought expensive toys, but seemed uncomfortable with his simple joy in life. Charlie sensed their disappointment when he preferred drawing pictures to playing with electronic gadgets. Their talks about sending him to private schools and specialized treatment centers scared him not for himself, but for how they made his mother's face tighten with worry. During his worse episodes, when pain made it hard to move, Charlie developed the habit of telling elaborate stories about his father. He imagined James as a superhero who fought against building-eating monsters, making his safety inspections sound like epic adventures. These stories seemed to comfort his mother, though sometimes they brought tears to her eyes. His greatest fear wasn't the illness or the treatments, but the possibility of being separated from his mother. He'd overheard enough adult conversations to understand the custody battle brewing around him. We're a team, he'd remind his mother fiercely during difficult moments, and teams stick together. Charlie's room reflected his unique spirit, one wall covered in medical charts that he'd decorated with stickers and drawings, another displaying his happiness collection photos, cards and small treasures that reminded him of good days. A handmade calendar marked important dates, doctor visits in red, Mum's paydays in green, and predicted miracle days in gold stars. Most evenings, he and his mother shared what they called their gratitude ritual, listing 3 good things about the day, no matter how small. On particularly hard days, Charlie would always include having the best mom ever. In his list, watching how it made her eyes shine with both love and determination. In his heart, Charlie carried an unshakable belief that everything would work out somehow. Life is just a big story, he'd often say, and all good stories have happy endings. We just haven't gotten there yet. The city mall bustled with Christmas shoppers when Charlie's first collapse occurred. Amelia had been working an extra shift at the cafe inside, and Charlie sat at his usual table near the window, drawing pictures and waiting for her break. The worn photograph of his mother beneath the oak tree lay beside his sketchbook, serving as inspiration for his latest artwork. Edward Holt hadn't planned to visit the mall that day. A last-minute gift for a business associate had pulled him away from his office, though he'd refused his driver's offer to handle the errand. Something about the season's atmosphere had made him restless, driving him to break his routine. The first sign something was wrong came when Charlie's pencil slipped from his fingers, clattering against the tile floor. The sound caught Edward's attention as he passed the cafe, his designer shoes clicking against the polished floor. He glanced over, more from habit than interest, just as Charlie's small frame began to slump in his chair. Mom Charlie's voice came out weak, barely a whisper, but it carried across the space between them. Edward found himself moving before he could think, reaching the boy just as he started to fall. The photograph on the table caught his eye, a ghost from his past that made his heart stutter. Amelia's scream cut through the holiday music, a sound of pure maternal terror that froze the bustling crowd. She rushed from behind the counter, still wearing her cafe apron, her face pale with fear. "Charlie, baby," stay with me. The moment she saw Edward holding her son, time seemed to stop. The mall's first aid team arrived quickly, but Charlie's condition was beyond their capabilities. His breathing had become labored, his skin taking on a frightening bluish tinge. Edward took control of the situation with the same authority he wielded in boardrooms, calling for his private medical team and arranging immediate hospital transport. In the chaos that followed, the photograph lay forgotten on the table. Edward picked it up automatically, his fingers recognizing the familiar texture of a print he'd carried for 15 years. But this copy was different, decorated with small hearts and stars drawn in a child's hand, labeled Mom's Princess Day in crayon. The hospital waiting room created a strange tableau: Amelia pacing in her cafe uniform, Edward standing rigid in his $1,000 suit, both watching the emergency room doors with equal intensity. The silence between them crackled with unspoken words and ancient hurts. "He has a congenital heart condition," Amelia finally spoke, her voice rough with worry. "The medications are so expensive. I've been working extra shifts." She stopped, seeming to remember who she was talking to, pride straightening her spine despite her obvious exhaustion. Edward wanted to reach out, to offer comfort or assistance, but years of corporate negotiations hadn't prepared him for this moment. Instead, he stood awkwardly, still holding Charlie's copy of the photograph, feeling its weight like an anchor to a past he'd tried to forget. The doctor's arrival brought both relief and new worries. Charlie was stable but would need to stay for observation. The underlying condition was worsening, requiring more aggressive and expensive treatment. Edward watched Amelia's face crumple slightly before she forced it back into a mask of determination. "I'll figure something out," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "I always do." The strength in her voice, despite everything, struck Edward deeply. This was a different Amelia from the one he'd known, harder, stronger, shaped by years of fighting battles alone. Charlie's small voice calling from the hospital bed broke the tension. "Mom, did you save my drawing?" And your princess picture. The tremor in his words revealed his fear, despite his brave attempt at normalcy. Edward watched as Amelia transformed, her whole demeanor softening as she moved to her son's bedside. The love between them was palpable, making the sterile hospital room feel suddenly warm and intimate. He felt like an intruder, yet couldn't make himself leave. The photograph still in his hand seemed to burn with significance. One image, two copies, carried by mother and former lover for 15 years. The coincidence felt too profound to ignore, like the universe had orchestrated this reunion for reasons he couldn't yet understand. The truth about James Thompson emerged in fragments during those long hospital hours. Edward recognized the name from old incident reports: a safety inspector who had died in a construction site collapse 5 years ago. But now, sitting in the sterile hospital corridor while Charlie slept, the cold facts from those corporate documents took on a devastating human dimension. James tried to warn them. Amelia's voice was quiet but sharp with old pain. He submitted report after report about the structural issues. Your company, your people. They buried his concerns. She sat across from Edward, the width of the hospital corridor between them feeling like an ocean of unspoken accusations. Edward remembered the incident vaguely: a tragic accident. The lawyers had called it. Insurance had been paid, documents had been filed, and corporate machinery had ground forward. He'd never connected the victim's name to Amelia, never imagined the ripple effects of those buried reports. "He called me that morning," Amelia continued, her fingers twisting the worn fabric of her cafe uniform. "He was finally going to confront senior management directly. He had evidence, photographs." Her voice broke. An hour later, the section he was inspecting collapsed. They said he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The weight of responsibility settled on Edward's shoulders like a lead coat. He'd been in Tokyo when it happened, focusing on international expansion. The accident had been handled by his subordinates, the details summarized in sterile quarterly reports. Through the hospital room window, Charlie's small form lay curled around his stuffed bear, medical monitors casting a pale glow over his sleeping face. The boy had his father's sense of justice, Amelia explained. Even at 8, he stood up for smaller kids at school, defended what he believed was right. James was the same way, she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. He couldn't walk past something wrong without trying to fix it. That's what got him killed. The accusation hung unspoken between them that Edward's company, his culture of profit over safety, had orphaned this child before his birth. Edward's investigation, started quietly that night through his phone, revealed the ugly truth. James's reports had been systematically suppressed by mid-level managers eager to keep construction on schedule. Corners had been cut, warnings ignored, and a good man had paid with his life. The official investigation cleared the company, Edward said slowly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. But it was wrong, wasn't it? We were wrong. The admission felt insufficient against the magnitude of the tragedy. But Amelia's eyes softened slightly at his use of we, his acceptance of responsibility. James Thompson's personnel file painted a picture of integrity. Perfect safety record, detailed reports, respected by workers and peers alike. His last email, sent the morning of his death, had gone to 3 senior executives, none of whom had apparently opened it before the accident. Charlie asks about him all the time, Amelia said, her voice softening as she looked at her sleeping son. I tell him his father was a hero who tried to protect people. It's not even a lie. She pulled out her phone, showing Edward a picture of James, a man with kind eyes, and Charlie's determined chin. The irony wasn't lost on Edward. Years ago, he'd let Amelia go, believing love would interfere with his ambitions. She'd found happiness with a man who exemplified the values Edward had abandoned in his pursuit of success. Now that man was dead because of the very corporate culture Edward had created. I never wanted the lawsuit, Amelia admitted quietly, but Charlie's medical bills. And when I found out about the suppressed reports, she shrugged, the gesture containing years of frustration and grief. James deserved justice. But they buried everything in legal paperwork until we couldn't afford to continue. Edward stared at his reflection in the dark hospital window, barely recognizing the man he'd become. Somewhere along his climb to success, he'd created a system that valued profits over people, efficiency over safety, corporate image over truth. That system had killed James Thompson and left Charlie growing up without a father. The magnitude of his indirect responsibility felt overwhelming. Yet watching Charlie sleep, seeing Amelia's unwavering strength, Edward knew he had to make this right, not just through money, but through real change. The mounting pressures in Amelia's life became painfully clear as Edward reviewed the stack of medical bills on her cafe table. Each paper represented another battle in her endless war to keep Charlie healthy and in her custody. The numbers were staggering. Monthly medications alone cost more than her combined salaries. Mrs. Harrison believes she can provide better care for Charlie, Amelia explained, referring to James's mother. She has the money, the connections. Her voice trembled slightly. Last week, her lawyers suggested I was being selfish, keeping Charlie with me when I can't afford the best treatments. The custody hearing loomed 2 months away. Edward recognized the law firm letterhead Blackwood Associates, notorious for aggressive family court tactics. They'd already built a case around Amelia's financial instability, portraying her multiple jobs as evidence of an unstable home environment rather than maternal dedication. Charlie's latest hospitalization had forced Amelia to miss 3 shifts at the cafe and cancel a week's worth of tutoring sessions. Her carefully balanced financial house of cards was crumbling. The rent was overdue, and the pharmacy had started requiring payment up front for Charlie's medications. I've applied for every assistance program, Amelia said, spreading out rejection letters, but we fall into that gap. I make too much to qualify for most aid, but nowhere near enough to cover everything. The irony of working 3 jobs and being considered too wealthy for help wasn't lost on either of them. Edward watched her organize the bills with practiced efficiency, sorting them into piles: urgent, critical, and absolutely desperate. Her hands were red and chapped from cafe work, her nails short and practical. This was a woman who hadn't bought anything for herself in years, who measured every penny against her son's needs. The hospital social worker had suggested declaring bankruptcy, but that would only strengthen Mrs. Harrison's custody case. The private school Charlie's grandparents proposed cost more per semester than Amelia made in a year. Their lawyer had hinted that dropping the custody suit would depend on Amelia being reasonable about Charlie's future. "They're not bad people," Amelia admitted, her exhaustion showing. "They love James, they love Charlie. They just can't understand why I won't step aside and let them give him everything I can't." She straightened a pile of overdue notices with trembling hands. "But they'd cut me out of his life completely. I'd lose him." The legal documents painted a brutal picture. Mrs. Harrison's team had built their case methodically: photographs of Amelia leaving work exhausted, records of Charlie's school absences, statements from medical experts about the advantages of private care. They'd even cited her continued pursuit of the construction accident investigation as evidence of unhealthy obsession. Charlie's health insurance, basic coverage through Amelia's teaching assistant position, barely covered routine care. Each hospitalization meant more debt, more payment plans, more late-night hours tutoring to earn extra dollars. The medications that kept him stable cost as much as their monthly rent. Edward saw how the system he'd helped build was crushing her. Insurance companies, legal firms, medical billing departments, all working with mechanical efficiency to grind down one mother's desperate fight for her child. His own company's legal department had been part of the wall of resistance she'd faced after James's death. A missed payment notice from Charlie's cardiologist caught his eye. The doctor was threatening to discontinue treatment without upfront payment for future visits. The next appointment was scheduled for the following week, with a balance due of $3,000, money Amelia simply didn't have. "I'll sell my car," Amelia said quietly, noticing Edward's focus on the letter. "It's not worth much, but maybe enough for this month's treatment." The defeat in her voice cut through his practiced corporate detachment. She'd already sold her mother's jewelry, her college textbooks, anything of value except the photographs of James that Charlie treasured. The final piece of paper was a letter from her landlord. The building had been sold, and the new owners were raising the rent beyond her means. In 60 days, she and Charlie would need to find a new home, adding housing uncertainty to the already overwhelming list of pressures they faced. Edward's initial attempts to help came through carefully constructed anonymity. A charitable foundation, newly created under his lawyer's name, reached out to Charlie's doctor with an offer to cover all medical expenses for selected pediatric cardiac patients. The practice didn't need to know the foundation had only one beneficiary. Late at night in his office, Edward meticulously planned each intervention to appear coincidental. An anonymous donor covered Amelia's overdue rent. A mysterious scholarship fund contacted the tutoring center, requesting her services at triple her usual rate. The cafe owner received an unexpected business grant, allowing her to promote Amelia to manager with better hours and health benefits. "Someone's watching over us," Amelia had told Charlie, her voice carrying a mix of relief and suspicion as she read the scholarship letter. Edward, listening through his weekly check-in call with the cafe owner, felt his chest tighten at her words. The hardest part was restraining himself from doing more. His instinct was to sweep in with grand gestures to buy the building, to establish a trust fund, to make all their problems disappear with his wealth. But he knew Amelia's pride, knew how quickly she'd reject such obvious interference. Instead, he worked behind the scenes, pulling strings with subtle precision. His company's legal department received mysterious orders to review the Thompson construction accident. Anonymous tips led investigative journalists to question the original findings. Pressure began mounting on the executives who had buried James's reports. Charlie's grandparents suddenly found their business interests under careful scrutiny. Nothing overt, nothing traceable, but enough to make them reconsider the wisdom of a public custody battle. Their lawyers received hints that the construction accident investigation might reopen, with uncomfortable questions about the family's silence after James's death. Edward deployed his resources like chess pieces, each move calculated to help without revealing his hand. A children's health advocacy group began lobbying for expanded insurance coverage of pediatric cardiac conditions. A real estate developer randomly selected Amelia's apartment building for renovation, offering residents generous relocation packages to better properties. The guilt ate at him during sleepless nights. Every anonymous gift felt like inadequate penance for his role in their struggles. He'd created the corporate culture that had killed James, had fostered the system that now threatened to separate mother and son. Money seemed a poor substitute for the years of hardship they'd endured. His assistant, Sarah, became his sole confidante in the endeavor. She handled the practical details, creating paper trails, managing the foundation, coordinating with various parties. "You're different since you met them," she observed one evening, sorting through charitable donation paperwork. "You're human." The comment struck deeper than she knew. Edward had spent years building walls around his emotions, treating people as assets or obstacles. Now, watching Charlie's face light up at simple pleasures, a new art supply set appearing mysteriously at his hospital bed, a chance to attend art therapy sessions, those walls began crumbling. Amelia's determination humbled him. Despite the anonymous help, she worked just as hard, saved just as carefully. She started a support group for other single parents of chronically ill children, sharing resources and strength. Edward found himself hiring private investigators just to send her information about assistance programs she might have missed. The foundation grew carefully, adding other families to mask its original purpose. Each new case was genuine children needing medical care, parents struggling with bills, but Charlie remained the heart of it all. Edward spent hours studying pediatric cardiac care, understanding treatments and options that might help. His corporate efficiency turned to a new purpose, creating safety nets so subtle that pride couldn't reject them. Emergency funds appeared in hospital departments, soup kitchens received donations earmarked for working families, library programs expanded their services for chronically ill children. Yet every time he saw them carefully orchestrated coincidental meetings at the hospital or more, the urge to confess nearly overwhelmed him. He wanted to tell Amelia everything, to beg forgiveness not just for the past but for his current deception. Only the fear of her rejection, of losing this chance to help, kept him silent. The change came suddenly on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning. Charlie had been coloring at his usual spot by the hospital window when his hands began to tremble. The crayons slipped from his fingers, leaving a jagged red line across his carefully drawn heart diagram. "Mum," he whispered, his voice smaller than usual, "I feel funny." Amelia recognized the signs instantly, the slight blue tinge to his lips, the rapid shallow breathing. Within minutes, the room filled with medical staff, their urgent voices mixing with the harsh beeping of monitors. Charlie's condition, stable for so long, had taken an unexpected turn. "The medications aren't working as effectively anymore," Dr. Richards explained later, his face grave as he showed them the latest test results. "His heart is struggling more than we'd like to see." The doctor's words fell like stones in the quiet consultation room. "There are treatment options, but they're aggressive and expensive." Amelia sat beside Charlie's bed that night, watching his chest rise and fall with each labored breath. The boy's usual cheerfulness had dimmed, though he still tried to smile when nurses checked on him. "I'm just tired," Mum he'd say, his attempt at reassurance breaking her heart. "Maybe my batteries need recharging." The hospital social worker brought forms for experimental treatment programs, each one offering hope wrapped in astronomical costs. Amelia filled them out mechanically, knowing they'd likely join the growing stack of rejections. Charlie's condition was too advanced for some, their financial situation too precarious for others. Edward, making one of his coincidental visits with charitable foundation paperwork, found them on day 3 of the hospitalization. Charlie lay sleeping, his face pale against the white pillows, while Amelia sat nearby, mechanically highlighting medical terms in a stack of research papers. "The new treatment plan," she explained without looking up, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep, "costs more than I make in 2 years. The specialist is in Boston." Her hands shook slightly as she turned a page. "They want a 50% deposit before they'll even schedule a consultation." The community rallied around them. The cafe staff organized fundraisers. Amelia's students' parents started a meal train and donation drive. Charlie's art teacher brought his whole class to the hospital to sing songs and deliver handmade cards. But the amount needed seemed insurmountable. Charlie's resilience began to crack under the strain of increasingly aggressive treatments. His artwork, usually bright and hopeful, turned to muted colors and unfinished lines. The stories he told about his father became shorter, more questioning. "Do you think Dad was scared?" he asked one evening, his voice small in the hospital darkness, when the building fell. The medical team spoke in increasingly urgent tones during their rounds. Words like critical window and optimal timing peppered their discussions. Each day of delay while they waited for funding meant Charlie's heart grew weaker, his chances for successful treatment diminishing. Amelia stopped sleeping more than an hour at a time, jerking awake at every change in Charlie's breathing or monitor beep. She took unpaid leave from her jobs, unable to bear being away from his bedside. The financial pressure mounted even as their options dwindled. Charlie tried to maintain his usual optimism, but his energy waned. "Maybe I'm not trying hard enough," he whispered one night, tears slipping down his cheeks. "The medicine's so expensive, Mom. Maybe if I just tried harder to get better." Amelia held him as he cried, her own tears falling silently. The hospital chaplain began stopping by more frequently, his gentle presence both a comfort and a terrifying reminder of what they faced. Charlie drew pictures for the other children in the pediatric ward, but now he had to rest after just a few minutes of coloring. Edward, watching from a careful distance, saw the light dimming in both their eyes. The anonymous help he'd arranged felt hollow now, mere bandages on a wound that required immediate, drastic intervention. The Foundation's careful procedures and anonymous donations weren't enough anymore. Time was running out. One morning, Charlie's hand slipped while reaching for his water glass. As it shattered on the floor, he burst into tears, not of pain or fear, but of frustration. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "Everything's so hard now." Amelia gathered him close, her own strength finally cracking. In that moment, watching through the door's window, Edward made his decision. Anonymity be damned. The truth emerged in layers, like peeling back old wallpaper to reveal forgotten patterns beneath. It started with a dusty file folder that Sarah, Edward's assistant, discovered while digitizing old company records. Inside lay the complete history of Edward's interference in Amelia's life, dating back to their college days. Letters from the university's scholarship committee revealed Edward's behind-the-scenes manipulation. He'd used his family's influence to block Amelia's teaching fellowship application, believing it would distract her from supporting his ambitions. The rejection had forced her to abandon her graduate studies, setting her on a different path entirely. "I thought I was protecting our future," Edward confessed to Sarah, staring at the yellowed papers. "I convinced myself she'd thank me later, once we'd achieved everything I'd planned." His voice cracked with the weight of 15 years of regret. "I was so wrong." All revelations followed. The investigation into James's death uncovered a pattern of systematic suppression. Edward's own signature appeared on policies that prioritized project deadlines over safety concerns. His corporate culture had created the environment that ultimately killed Charlie's father. Amelia discovered some truths of her own. Her parents' rejection hadn't been purely about disappointment in her broken engagement. Edward's father had visited them, suggesting their daughter was a gold digger, unsuitable for their social circle. The painful family rift had been orchestrated from the start. The hospital's administrative files held another shock. Edward's anonymous foundation wasn't as anonymous as he'd thought. A sharp-eyed nurse recognized the payment patterns, connecting them to similar arrangements at other hospitals. She shared her suspicions with Amelia one quiet evening during rounds. Charlie, despite his illness, proved surprisingly perceptive. "Mum," he said one afternoon, playing with his art supplies, "Mr. Edward has the same sad look in his eyes that you get when you look at Dad's picture. Like he lost something important too." His innocent observation cut straight to the heart of the matter. James's parents, the Harrisons, had their own revelations to share. They'd known about the safety violations at the construction site, but had accepted a generous settlement in exchange for their silence. The guilt of that decision had driven their aggressive pursuit of Charlie's custody, an attempt at redemption that only caused more pain. Old college friends, seeing news coverage of Charlie's fundraising efforts, began reaching out. They remembered Edward and Amelia's relationship differently than either had portrayed it. "You both changed," one wrote to Amelia. "He became colder, but you became stronger. Maybe you needed to lose each other to become who you were meant to be." Edward's investigation into his own past actions revealed a pattern he'd been blind to. Every major business success had come at the cost of someone else's dreams. He'd built his empire on buried hopes and broken promises, telling himself it was the price of progress. The hardest truth came from Charlie's art therapy sessions. His drawings told a story he couldn't verbalize: pictures of a complete family, of his mother smiling without worry lines, of a father figure whose face gradually shifted from James's features to a combination that looked surprisingly like Edward's. Amelia found her own collection of old photographs, including ones from the day Edward had first blocked her teaching fellowship. Her smile in those images held no hint of the betrayal to come. "I was so naive," she told Charlie's nurse, "thinking love was enough to change someone's nature." The hospital chaplain who'd known James shared his own memories. James had admired Edward's business acumen but feared his influence. The day before the accident, he revealed, James came to pray, not for himself but for the courage to stand up to men like Edward Holt. Sarah uncovered more evidence of Edward's long-reaching influence in Amelia's life. Job applications mysteriously rejected, apartment applications delayed, small obstacles that had shaped her path without her knowledge. Each revelation added to the weight of Edward's guilt. The truth hung between them now, unavoidable and demanding acknowledgement. Edward's attempts to help, however well-intentioned, were built on a foundation of past manipulation and control. The question wasn't just whether Amelia could forgive him, but whether redemption was even possible against such a history of calculated interference. The process of rebuilding trust began in small moments, fragile as spider silk but gradually growing stronger. It started in the hospital cafeteria, where Edward found himself joining Amelia for late-night coffee after Charlie's treatments. Their conversations, initially stilted and focused solely on Charlie's care, slowly expanded to include memories and shared regrets. "I keep that photograph too," Edward admitted one night, pulling out his worn copy. "All these years it reminded me of everything I lost through my own choices." The confession hung between them, neither accusation nor plea, simply truth. Amelia studied both photos side by side, her copy decorated with Charlie's drawings, Edward's worn smooth from years of handling. Charlie became their bridge, his innocent wisdom softening the sharp edges of their past. He insisted on including Edward in his daily art sessions, assigning him the important task of color selection. "You need practice seeing beautiful things," Charlie explained, handing him a box of crayons. "Mom says beauty helps heal hearts." The hospital staff noticed the gradual shift. Edward no longer arrived in full business attire, instead wearing casual clothes that let him sit comfortably on Charlie's bed for story time. Amelia's tension eased slightly when he entered the room, her defensive posture softening incrementally with each visit. Their shared concern for Charlie created a new kind of intimacy, different from their youthful romance. They learned to read each other's fears in subtle signs: a tightened jaw, a hidden tremor in hands, a too bright smile masking worry. Without discussing it, they developed a system of silent support during difficult medical consultations. Edward found himself sharing more of his own struggles. He told Amelia about his lonely penthouse, about decisions he regretted, about the emptiness of success without meaning. She listened without judgment, offering neither absolution nor condemnation. "We're all works in progress," she said simply, echoing one of Charlie's favorite phrases. Charlie's art therapy sessions became a family affair. Edward learned to participate in the boys' elaborate storytelling games, where medical equipment transformed into magical devices and hospital corridors became enchanted forests. Amelia watched their interactions with complex emotions, seeing glimpses of the man she'd once loved emerging from behind the corporate facade. The cafe staff, protective of Amelia, gradually accepted Edward's presence in their tight-knit community. Martha, the owner, began saving his favorite muffins along with Amelia's regular order. "He's trying," she told Amelia one morning. "Sometimes trying has to be enough to start with." Edward's involvement in Charlie's care became more direct, less hidden behind anonymous donations. He attended medical consultations openly, asked intelligent questions, and used his business expertise to navigate insurance complexities. His corporate efficiency, once used to build wealth, now focused on securing the best possible care for Charlie. Small traditions developed naturally. Sunday evenings became movie nights in Charlie's hospital room, with Edward bringing takeout from Amelia's favorite restaurant. Charlie insisted they all wear matching pajamas, a request Edward surprisingly agreed to without hesitation. These moments, simple and genuine, began healing wounds that money could never touch. Amelia found herself sharing more about James, showing Edward pictures and telling stories about Charlie's father. Instead of tension, these conversations carried a sense of honoring James's memory while acknowledging the present's new reality. Charlie listened intently, adding his own imagined adventures to his father's story. The hospital garden became their retreat during difficult days. Edward learned to sit in companionable silence while Amelia worked on lesson plans for her students. Charlie drew pictures of the flowers, creating elaborate stories about their secret lives. These peaceful moments, free from medical urgency or past regrets, allowed them to know each other anew. Edward's own transformation became apparent in subtle ways. His phone remained silent during visits. Board meetings were rescheduled around Charlie's treatments. He learned every nurse's name, remembered their children's ages, brought coffee for the night shift. The corporate shark developed a human heart. Their shared history, once a source of pain, gradually became part of a larger story. They could acknowledge past mistakes without being defined by them. Charlie's optimism proved contagious, his belief in second chances influencing them both. "Sometimes people just need time to grow into their best selves," he declared with 8-year-old certainty. Edward's transformation began in his corporate office, where he initiated a complete overhaul of company safety protocols. Pictures of Charlie and Amelia appeared on his desk, replacing the stark minimalism he'd maintained for years. His staff noticed the changes first. Their ruthless CEO now asked about their families, remembered birthdays, and genuinely listened during meetings. "I used to measure success in profit margins," he confided to Sarah one evening, reviewing charity foundation documents. "Now I measure it in Charlie's smiles and Amelia's trust." His assistant watched him decline aggressive business opportunities that once would have consumed him, choosing instead to focus on ethical corporate practices and worker safety. Amelia's growth manifested differently. The constant struggle had hardened her, built walls of protection around her heart. But Charlie's illness and Edward's reappearance forced her to acknowledge her need for support. She learned to accept help without seeing it as defeat, to trust without expecting betrayal. Her students' parents noticed her smile returning, carrying hints of the young woman from the oak tree photograph. Charlie's hospital room became a classroom for them all. He taught Edward about courage, showing him how to face fear with hope. He taught Amelia about forgiveness, demonstrating how to hold pain and love in the same heart. His artwork evolved, now featuring 3 figures instead of 2, his family expanding through love rather than obligation. The changes rippled outward. Edward established a foundation in James's name, focusing on construction site safety and support for families affected by workplace accidents. Amelia joined the board, her experience and insight shaping policies that could prevent other families from suffering similar losses. Their shared project became a way to honor James's memory while building something new. In the hospital cafeteria, Edward learned to drink coffee from paper cups instead of his usual expensive blend. He sat with other parents, listening to their stories, offering support both financial and emotional. His tailored suits gave way to comfortable sweaters, his corporate masks softening into genuine empathy. The Billionaire CEO became simply Charlie's friend Edward to the hospital staff. Amelia discovered her own strength in new ways. She spoke at support groups for single parents, sharing her journey without shame. The determination that had kept her going alone now inspired others. Her tutoring sessions expanded to include other parents in the pediatric ward, creating a community of mutual support and understanding. Through it all, Charlie watched with quiet wisdom. "Mom's learning to dance again," he told Edward during one of their art sessions, carefully coloring a picture of his mother smiling. Not with her feet, but with her heart. His observation made Edward realize how long it had been since he'd seen real joy in Amelia's eyes. The corporate board noticed changes in their CEO's priorities. Edward redirected company resources toward employee welfare and community support. When challenged, he spoke of legacy not of wealth or power, but of positive impact on people's lives. Some directors resisted, but Edward's newfound conviction proved stronger than their protests. Amelia's parents reached out hesitantly, having heard about Charlie's condition. Their reunion was cautious, years of hurt not easily erased, but watching their daughter's strength, seeing the support system she'd built, they began to recognize how wrong they'd been. Edward's presence helped bridge the gap, his own transformation a testament to the possibility of change. The hospital became a different place for them. What started as a space of fear and medical procedures transformed into a place of healing not just for Charlie's heart, but for all of them. Edward learned to read medical charts with the same intensity he once gave to financial reports. Amelia found moments of peace in the garden, watching Charlie and Edward plant hope alongside the flowers. Their individual changes wove together, creating a tapestry of growth and redemption. Edward's business acumen merged with newfound compassion, creating innovative programs for employee support. Amelia's protective instincts evolved into a strength that could accept help while maintaining independence. Charlie's natural optimism deepened into a wisdom beyond his years. Most profound was the change in how they saw themselves. Edward no longer defined himself solely through success and power. Amelia released the burden of having to be everything to everyone. They learned to be vulnerable, to accept imperfection, to value connection over control. Charlie's simple acceptance of them all past mistakes, present struggles, and future hopes showed them how to accept themselves. The first crack in their carefully constructed new reality came from an unexpected source, a business reporter investigating Edward's sudden shift in corporate priorities. The article, splashed across the financial section, questioned his relationship with a former employee's widow and her sick child, implying improper motivations behind his recent charitable activities. Amelia found the newspaper on Charlie's bedside table, left by a well-meaning visitor. Her hands trembled as she read the implications, suggestions that she was manipulating Edward's guilt, using Charlie's condition to secure financial advantages. The article dredged up old rumors about James's death, questioning the timing of Edward's renewed interest in the family. The hospital corridor became a gauntlet of whispered conversations and curious stares. Nurses who had been friendly now watched with speculation in their eyes. Some parents in the pediatric ward pulled away, as if poverty and illness might be contagious. The cocoon of privacy they'd built around Charlie's treatment shattered under public scrutiny. Edward's board of directors called an emergency meeting. Shareholders were concerned about his judgment, questioning the substantial resources being directed toward one family. His recent policy changes faced renewed opposition, with board members suggesting his emotional involvement was clouding his business acumen. "We need to consider the company's reputation," one director stated bluntly. "Your personal rehabilitation project is becoming a liability." The word stung, but not as much as seeing Amelia's face when she quietly left the hospital cafeteria after overhearing similar sentiments from other visitors. Charlie noticed the tension, though everyone tried to hide it from him. His drawings became darker, featuring storm clouds and shadowy figures. During art therapy, he created a picture of 3 people holding hands while rain fell around them. Sometimes, he explained to his worried mother, being together means getting wet in the same storm. The Harrisons seized the opportunity, their lawyers citing the media attention as evidence of an unstable environment. They filed emergency motions, arguing that the publicity surrounding Edward's involvement proved Amelia was exploiting her son's illness. The custody battle, which had quieted, roared back to life with renewed vigor. Hospital administration called a meeting with Amelia, expressing concerns about disruption to other families. The suggested solution, moving Charlie to a private wing, felt like exile. Edward's financial support, once a lifeline, now carried a weight that threatened to drag them all under. Privacy became impossible. Photographers lurked near hospital entrances, hoping to catch glimpses of the billionaire visiting his secret family. Social media buzzed with speculation and judgment. Charlie's condition became public property, dissected by strangers who knew nothing of their daily battles. Edward's past returned to haunt them in new ways. Former business associates emerged with stories of his ruthless practices, suggesting his interest in Charlie was merely another calculated move. Old photographs of Edward and Amelia from their college days surfaced, feeding rumors of a long-planned deception. The foundation supporting Charlie's treatment faced audit demands. Though everything was legitimate, the scrutiny added layers of stress to already complicated medical decisions. Each payment, each consultation, now required extensive documentation to prove propriety. Amelia watched her carefully constructed support system begin to crumble. The cafe owner, facing media attention that disrupted business, reluctantly reduced her hours. Some tutoring clients, concerned about the publicity, found other teachers. The community that had rallied around them started to pull back, wary of being drawn into the controversy. Charlie's health reflected the mounting pressure. His recovery plateaued, medical readings showing the impact of stress on his fragile system. During one particularly difficult night, he asked Amelia a question that broke her heart. "Should I pretend not to like Edward anymore? Would that make things easier?" Edward faced his own demons. The more he tried to protect them, the more his efforts seemed to backfire. His presence, meant to support, now threatened the stability Amelia had worked so hard to maintain. The press painted him as either a manipulated fool or a calculating manipulator. No narrative allowed for genuine change or redemption. The complications created distance where they'd built connection. Meals together became tense, conversation careful. The easy rapport they'd developed fractured under the weight of external judgment. Even their shared photograph, once a symbol of hope and healing, now felt like evidence in an ongoing trial of their motives and relationships. The crisis came without warning on a quiet Sunday evening. Charlie had been drawing, his latest artwork showing a family holding hands beneath a rainbow, when his breathing suddenly became labored. The crayon slipped from his fingers, leaving a jagged line across the hopeful scene. "Mum," he whispered, "something's wrong." Amelia recognized the signs instantly: the bluish tinge to his lips, the rapid shallow breaths, the fear in his eyes that he tried so hard to hide. This time was different, worse than previous episodes. Her fingers trembled as she hit the emergency call button, her other hand gripping Charlie's with desperate strength. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Medical staff rushed in, their voices urgent but professional. Monitors screamed warnings as Charlie's vital signs plummeted. Through it all, he kept his eyes locked on Amelia's face, trying to be brave even as tears slid down his cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mom," he managed between gasps. "I was trying so hard to get better." Edward arrived just as they were rushing Charlie to intensive care, his casual Sunday clothes a sharp contrast to his usual business attire. He found Amelia standing frozen in the empty room, Charlie's unfinished drawing still on the bed. Without words, he wrapped his arms around her, letting her break down for the first time since this journey began. The hours in the ICU waiting room stretched endlessly. Doctors came and went, their updates becoming increasingly serious. Charlie's heart was failing faster than anticipated. The current treatments weren't enough. They needed to make immediate decisions about more aggressive options, experimental procedures that carried their own risks. But there's a specialist in Boston, Dr. Richards explained, spreading out medical charts. He's pioneering a new approach, but the treatment is experimental. Insurance won't cover it, the cost he quoted made Amelia's knees buckle. Even for Edward, it was a staggering amount, and time was critical. Every hour of delay decreased Charlie's chances. Through the ICU window, they could see Charlie connected to a maze of machines. His small body seemed lost among the tubes and wires, his usual vibrant energy dimmed to a fragile spark. The sight broke something in both of them. Edward reached for his phone, ready to move heaven and earth, but Amelia's hand on his arm stopped him. "The board is watching," she reminded him, her voice rough with tears. "If you do this, they'll use it against you. Everything you've built, the choice hung between them, Edward's life's work or Charlie's chance at survival." The man who once chose ambition over love now faced a similar crossroads, but with devastatingly higher stakes. The hospital chaplain found them there, offering quiet support as they grappled with impossible decisions. Charlie's latest artwork decorated his ICU room, pictures of sunshine and hope that stood in stark contrast to the medical reality surrounding him. One drawing showed 3 figures holding hands, labeled simply "My family." Edward stepped away to make a call, his voice carrying authority even through obvious emotion. When he returned, his face showed both determination and fear. "I've called an emergency board meeting," he said quietly. "I'm going to sell my controlling shares. It should cover the treatment and secure the company's future without me." Amelia stared at him, recognizing the magnitude of his sacrifice. "Edward, no, your company. It's your life's work," but even as she protested, Charlie's monitors beeped in the background, a constant reminder that time was running out. Edward took her hands, his eyes holding a certainty she remembered from their youth. "No," he corrected gently. "This being here, helping Charlie, making things right, this is my life's work. I just didn't know it until now." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning and years of regret transformed into purpose. A nurse interrupted their moment, hurrying in with urgent news. Charlie's condition had deteriorated further. They needed to make a decision about the Boston treatment immediately. The next few hours would determine everything: Charlie's fate, their future, the price of redemption. In the ICU, Charlie stirred briefly, his eyes finding them through a haze of medication. "Are you still my family?" he asked softly, his voice muffled by the oxygen mask. Even with all the problems, the question cut through their adult complications, reducing everything to what truly mattered. The emergency board meeting convened at midnight in Holt Industries' main conference room. Edward stood at the head of the table, his casual clothes a stark contrast to the formal business attire surrounding him. The boardroom, once his domain of power, now felt like an arena where he would fight his final battle. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion, "I've called you here because I'm selling my controlling shares in Holt Industries." The announcement sparked immediate chaos. Board members erupted in protests, legal advisors frantically shuffled papers, and his longest-serving directors stared in disbelief. Sarah stood in the corner, tears in her eyes as she distributed the documentation. She'd helped prepare the paperwork, understanding that this moment represented far more than a business transaction. The files she handed out included not just share transfer agreements, but also evidence of the company's past safety violations, including those that led to James Thompson's death. "This is madness," Richard Blackwood, his senior director, exploded. "You're throwing away a billion-dollar empire for what? A dying kid and his gold-digging mother." The words echoed in the sudden silence. Edward's face hardened, years of corporate diplomacy falling away. "That dying kid is James Thompson's son." Edward's voice cut through the tension. "The same James Thompson who tried to warn us about safety violations. The same violations we buried in paperwork and legal settlements. The same decisions that built this empire on the blood of good men." The evidence was damning. Safety reports marked urgent but never addressed. Warnings ignored for the sake of deadlines. Settlements designed to silence grieving families. Each document revealed the true cost of their corporate success, written in lives lost and families destroyed. "I'm not just selling my shares," Edward continued, facing down his stunned board. "But I'm turning over evidence of every safety violation, every covered-up accident, every silenced complaint to the appropriate authorities. This company will be rebuilt on ethical foundations, or it won't survive at all." The lawyers began quoting regulations, threatening legal action. Old allies turned to open enemies across the conference table. But Edward stood firm, drawing strength from the image of Charlie fighting for his life in the ICU. The same determination that had built his empire now fueled its transformation. "You have two choices," he announced, sliding folders across the table. "Sign these agreements to implement comprehensive safety reforms and establish a victims' compensation fund, or face a public investigation that will destroy everything. Either way, my shares will fund Charlie's treatment." The battle raged through the night. Corporate raiders circled, sensing weakness. Allies became adversaries, then reluctant partners as the reality of their situation became clear. Edward's evidence was too comprehensive, his resolve too absolute to fight. Dawn was breaking when the final documents were signed. Edward's empire, built over 20 years, had been traded for a chance to save one child's life. But as he walked out of the boardroom for the last time, he felt lighter than he had in years. Sarah caught up with him at the elevator. "Was it worth it?" she asked softly, handing him the final execution copies. Edward thought of Charlie's drawings, of Amelia's strength, of the family he'd found in the midst of losing everything else. "The company was built on broken promises and buried truths," he replied. "Charlie's chance at life will be built on honesty and sacrifice. Tell me which foundation is stronger." His former assistant smiled through her tears, understanding that she was witnessing not the fall of an empire, but the rise of something far more valuable. As he drove back to the hospital, news alerts began popping up on his phone. The business world was already buzzing with speculation about Holt Industries' future. His net worth, once measured in billions, had plummeted. But for the first time in his adult life, numbers on a screen held no power over him. The hospital was quieter at this early hour. He found Amelia asleep in the ICU waiting room, Charlie's latest drawing clutched in her hands. The picture showed their three figures standing together, surrounded by what looked like rays of sunshine. At the bottom, in Charlie's shaky handwriting, were the words, "My real treasure." Edward settled into the chair beside her, physically and emotionally drained, but at peace with his choices. The empire he'd sacrificed seemed insignificant compared to the wealth he'd found in this hospital love, redemption, and the chance to finally become the man he should have been all along. The truth emerged in the quiet hours before dawn, as Edward and Amelia sat vigil beside Charlie's ICU bed. Edward's hand shook slightly as he pulled out a folder containing his latest medical results. "There's something I haven't told you," he began softly, careful not to wake Charlie. "I received my diagnosis 3 months ago." The clinical terms on the medical report stood stark against the white paper advanced pancreatic cancer, aggressive progression, limited treatment options. Amelia's hands trembled as she read, understanding dawning in her eyes. Edward's recent actions, the urgency in his reforms, the reckless generosity, the desperate need for redemption suddenly took on new meaning. "The doctors gave me 6 months," Edward continued, his voice steady despite the weight of his confession. "I wanted to make things right before he trailed off. Watching Charlie's peaceful sleep, I thought I had time to do it properly, to rebuild trust slowly. But Charlie's condition..." His voice broke slightly. Amelia sat in stunned silence, the medical report crumpling slightly in her grip. Memories of the past months replayed in her mind: Edward's increasing pallor, the way he tired more easily, the subtle winces he tried to hide. She'd been so focused on Charlie's illness, she'd missed the signs of another battle being fought silently beside them. "Does Charlie know?" she finally asked, though she already knew the answer. Edward shook his head, managing a small smile. "He has enough burdens. I wanted to be his strength, not another worry." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The man who once abandoned them was now sacrificing everything, including his last months, to protect them. The revelation continued as Edward explained his plans. His fortune, what remained after funding Charlie's treatment, would be placed in a trust. The foundation bearing James's name would continue its work, ensuring other families wouldn't face their struggles alone. He'd arranged everything, preparing for a future he wouldn't see. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," he said quietly, watching Charlie's chest rise and fall. "But you deserve to know why I can't be the long-term solution I wanted to be. Why I had to compress years of making amends into months." His hand found hers in the dimness, an echo of their younger selves. Amelia's response surprised them both. She laughed softly, though tears streamed down her face. All this time, she whispered, "I've been afraid to trust your changes, worried you'd leave us again. And now..." She couldn't finish, but her grip on his hand tightened. Charlie stirred slightly, mumbling in his sleep. They both froze, watching as he settled back into peaceful rest. The monitors beeped steadily, each sound a reminder of the precious nature of time, something both Edward and Charlie were running short on. "I wanted to create a legacy of more than just money and power," Edward admitted. "Something meaningful. When I saw you and Charlie that first day in the mall, I realized what really matters. I just didn't know then how little time I had to make it right." The night nurse paused in her rounds, observing the scene through the window: the sleeping child, the grieving mother, the dying billionaire. She'd seen many versions of love and loss in these halls, but something about their tableau spoke of both endings and beginnings. Amelia found herself sharing her own fears of losing Charlie, of facing life alone again, of trusting only to be hurt. The walls they'd built between them crumbled in the face of their shared vulnerability. Edward's imminent loss made their past grievances seem small against the vastness of what they now faced together. "Promise me something," Edward said as dawn began to paint the sky outside Charlie's window. "Promise me you'll tell him about these months. Not about my illness, but about how he taught me to live again. How his strength showed me what real courage looks like." The morning light caught the tears on Amelia's face as she nodded. They sat together, hands clasped, watching Charlie sleep. The boy who had brought them back together, who had taught them about love and forgiveness, now faced his own battle for survival. And Edward, in his final act of redemption, had given everything to ensure that battle could be fought. Charlie's transport to Boston occurred during the worst snowstorm of the season. The medical helicopter swayed in the bitter wind, each turbulent moment stretching Amelia's nerves to breaking point. Edward, despite his own deteriorating condition, sat beside her, his face grey with exhaustion but determined to see them safely delivered. The initial evaluation at Boston's specialized cardiac unit brought devastating news. Charlie's condition had weakened significantly during the transfer. The pioneering treatment they'd pinned their hopes on now carried risks that seemed insurmountable. The specialist's words fell like hammer blows. His system may be too compromised to withstand the procedure. While Charlie slept, heavily sedated to maintain his fragile stability, corporate wolves circled what remained of Edward's empire. News leaked about his wholesale liquidation of assets, triggering a market panic. The board of directors, despite their signed agreements, began maneuvering to minimize their exposure to the promised safety reforms. Amelia watched helplessly as both her pillars of support seemed to crumble simultaneously. Charlie's vital signs continued their gradual decline, while Edward grew visibly weaker with each passing day. The man who had once commanded boardrooms now needed help walking to the hospital cafeteria, though he tried to hide his deterioration behind weak smiles. The Harrisons chose this moment to renew their custody battle with increased aggression. Their lawyers argued that Charlie's critical condition proved Amelia's inability to make sound medical decisions. They submitted emergency petitions seeking temporary guardianship, citing their financial ability to pursue any treatment necessary. The hospital's ethics committee called an emergency meeting. Charlie's proposed treatment plan was deemed too experimental, the risks too high. They recommended a more conservative approach, essentially making him comfortable rather than fighting for a cure. The suggestion sent Amelia into a rage that left her hoarse from screaming and Edward holding her as she collapsed. Edward's own medical team arrived from New York, insisting he begin immediate treatment for his advancing cancer. The coincidence was cruel. The same hospital now held both Charlie and Edward, each fighting their own battle against time. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about hospice care and making necessary arrangements. Charlie, in his moments of lucidity, sensed the heavy atmosphere around him. His artwork, once bright and hopeful, turned to muted colors and unfinished lines. "I'm trying really hard to be brave," he whispered to Amelia one night, "but I'm scared, Mom. Everyone looks so sad." The media descended like vultures, somehow catching wind of the drama unfolding in the hospital. Stories emerged painting Edward as a mentally unstable businessman destroying his company over guilt, Amelia as a manipulative former flame, and Charlie as the tragic pawn in their drama. Reporters attempted to sneak into the hospital disguised as visitors. Even the weather seemed to conspire against them. The snowstorm intensified, delaying critical medical supplies and stranding key specialists in other cities. The hospital ran on emergency power several times, each power fluctuation sending Charlie's monitors into alarm and Amelia's heart into panic. Edward received his own devastating update. His cancer had spread more aggressively than initially thought. The doctor estimated weeks rather than months, suggesting he consider hospice care sooner rather than later. He accepted the news with quiet dignity, his only question being whether he had enough time to see Charlie through his treatment. The culmination came one particularly dark night when Charlie's heart showed signs of further deterioration. As medical staff rushed around them, Amelia caught sight of their reflection in the window, her own desperate face, Edward's gaunt features, and between them, Charlie's small form fighting for each breath. They looked like what they were, a family being torn apart before they'd had a chance to truly become one. The hospital chapel became Amelia's sanctuary during the darkest hours. She knelt in the dim light, her prayers a desperate whisper, as both Charlie and Edward fought their separate battles with death. The small space held other parents too, all of them united in their vigils of hope and fear. Edward's decline accelerated rapidly. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about organ failure and pain management, but he refused heavy medication, determined to remain lucid for whatever time Charlie had left. His once commanding presence had diminished to a shadow, yet his eyes retained their intensity when focused on Charlie's monitors. The legal threats arrived daily now. The Harrisons' lawyers filed motion after motion, each more aggressive than the last. They claimed Amelia's emotional attachment to Edward clouded her judgment regarding Charlie's care. Hospital security had to remove James's mother when she attempted to force her way into Charlie's room, insisting she had a right to see her grandson. Charlie's art therapy sessions became increasingly difficult to watch. His once vibrant drawings grew smaller, confined to corners of the paper, as if he was slowly disappearing from his own creations. "I keep trying to draw happy endings," he confided to Edward during one session, "but the colors don't want to stay inside the lines anymore." The hospital bills mounted despite Edward's provisions. The experimental treatment's costs spiraled beyond even the initial estimates, while insurance continued denying coverage. The financial team started making subtle suggestions about considering other options. Their euphemisms for giving up thinly veiled. Amelia found herself sleeping in awkward shifts between Charlie's bed and Edward's room, trying to support both of them while her own strength waned. The cafeteria staff started bringing her food unprompted, worried by how thin she'd become. Her fingers constantly worried the worn photograph in her pocket, as if it could somehow connect her to happier times. Edward's corporate legacy unraveled thread by thread. News channels reported daily on the Holt Industries crisis, with experts analyzing how one of America's most successful businessmen had apparently lost his mind. Former allies gave interviews suggesting early-onset dementia or psychological breakdown, anything to explain his dramatic transformation. The nights were worst. Charlie's breathing would often become more labored in darkness, as if the night itself were too heavy for his struggling heart. During one particularly difficult episode, he asked Amelia a question that haunted her mom: "If I go to heaven, will you and Edward be okay without me?" Edward's doctors increased their pressure for him to enter hospice care. His stubbornness, once a source of his success, now manifested in his refusal to give up his daily visits to Charlie, even when walking became almost impossible. Hospital staff began keeping a wheelchair outside his room, though he refused to use it when Charlie could see. The weather remained relentlessly grim, matching their mood. Grey skies pressed against the windows, and the constant snow made the world feel smaller, more confined. Even the hospital's holiday decorations seemed to mock their situation, their forced cheer highlighting the gravity of their reality. Support began to drift away as weeks stretched into months. Friends stopped visiting as frequently, uncomfortable with the intensity of suffering they witnessed. Some of Charlie's young friends from the pediatric ward were discharged, or worse, didn't return at all, leaving their shared art wall feeling increasingly empty. One particularly dark night, Amelia found Edward attempting to work on his laptop, trying to salvage something of his company's safety reforms despite his weakened state. "I need to finish this," he whispered when she tried to make him rest. "I need to leave something better than what I built." Before his determination broke something in her, and they held each other, crying for all they were losing and had already lost. Time seemed to move differently in the cardiac intensive care unit, measured not in hours but in the steady beep of monitors and the mechanical whoosh of breathing machines. Charlie's condition continued its steady decline, each day bringing new complications. The specialist spoke in increasingly guarded terms about his prospects. Edward's own battle with cancer reached its final stages. His doctors gave him days, perhaps a week at most. Yet he continued his daily ritual, having the nurses wheel him to Charlie's room where he would sit for hours, telling stories about brave knights and unbeatable dragons, his voice growing weaker but his determination unchanging. The Harrisons won a partial legal victory, gaining the right to participate in medical decisions. Their presence added tension to every consultation, their wealth and influence casting shadows over each discussion. They pushed for transferring Charlie to another facility, arguing that the current treatment plan was failing. Charlie's artwork stopped entirely. His sketchbook lay untouched on the bedside table, the crayons scattered and forgotten. Even on his better days, he lacked the strength to hold a pencil for more than a few minutes. The blank pages seemed to mock their hopes, as empty as their prayers were becoming. Amelia found herself speaking to James's photograph late at night, When the hospital corridors grew quiet, "I need you to guide me," she would whisper, tracing his face through the protective plastic. "Tell me how to save our son," but the smiling image offered no answers, only memories of another loss she hadn't been able to prevent. Edward's business empire crumbled completely. The safety reforms he'd fought for were quietly shelved by the board, his legacy of change dismantled piece by piece. News coverage shifted from scandal to obituary preparation, business publications already drafting summaries of his tragic fall from grace. The Hospital Ethics Committee convened again, this time to discuss ending aggressive treatment. Their recommendations, couched in gentle terms, all pointed toward the same conclusion: Charlie's fight was becoming futile. They suggested focusing on comfort care, on making his remaining time peaceful rather than prolonging the struggle. During one lucid moment, Charlie made a request that broke both Edward and Amelia's hearts. "Can we take a family picture?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Like the one Mom keeps of her under the tree? So people will remember we were happy together, even if it wasn't for very long." The photograph session happened the next day, arranged by a kind-hearted nurse. Charlie insisted on sitting up, though it exhausted him. Edward forced himself out of his wheelchair, standing behind Charlie's bed with one hand on Amelia's shoulder for support. They all smiled, pretending not to notice the oxygen tubes and IV lines that filled the frame. Medical updates became a litany of failing systems and diminishing options. Charlie's heart, overtaxed and weakening, struggled to maintain even basic functions. Edward's cancer spread aggressively, his pain barely managed by increasing doses of morphine. The parallel decline felt like a cruel, cosmic joke. Amelia stopped sleeping altogether, afraid to miss any precious moments with either of them. The hospital staff watched with growing concern as she paced between rooms, a ghost in the fluorescent lighting. Her strength, seemingly endless throughout their ordeal, began to show dangerous cracks. The final blow came when Charlie developed a severe infection. His compromised immune system, already fighting on too many fronts, couldn't mount an effective defense. As his fever spiked and his oxygen levels dropped, the doctors prepared Amelia for the worst. Edward, barely conscious in his own hospital bed, demanded to be taken to Charlie's room one last time. They gathered around Charlie's bed, a family forged in crisis now facing its dissolution before it had truly formed. The monitors beeped their ominous rhythm, each sound a countdown they couldn't stop. Outside, the winter storm that had haunted their entire journey intensified, as if nature itself reflected their despair. "Tell me another story," Charlie whispered, his voice nearly inaudible beneath the oxygen mask. One with a happy ending. Edward and Amelia exchanged glances over his bed, both fighting tears. In that moment, hope seemed as distant as the sun behind the storm clouds, as unreachable as the dreams they'd once shared beneath an oak tree so many years ago. The truth revealed itself in the most unexpected way through a young nurse who had worked at Holt Industries Medical Center years ago. She recognized Edward during her night shift and brought forward a set of documents she'd kept hidden since James's accident, proof that would change everything. Mr. Thompson wasn't just reporting safety violations, she explained, spreading old papers across Charlie's bedside table. He was working with Mr. Holt directly. They were building a case against corrupt board members who were endangering workers for profit. The documentation showed a secret email chain between James and Edward, planning to expose the corruption together. Edward, barely conscious in his wheelchair, confirmed the story with a weak nod. "James was my inside man," he whispered. "We were close to exposing everything when his voice broke. The board discovered our investigation. The construction site collapse wasn't an accident. It was a warning meant for me." The revelations continued as Sarah, Edward's former assistant, arrived with more evidence. She'd been quietly gathering information since Charlie's first hospitalization, putting together pieces of a puzzle that spanned 15 years. The thick folder she carried contained proof of Edward's secret efforts to protect Amelia and Charlie over the years. Bank records showed anonymous deposits into Amelia's account during particularly difficult months. Scholarship offers that materialized when she needed them most. Job opportunities that appeared at crucial moments. Edward had been watching over them from afar, trying to atone for his failure to protect James while maintaining the distance he thought they needed. Mrs. Harrison, arriving for her court-mandated visit, found herself faced with evidence of her own family's complicity. The settlement they'd accepted hadn't just bought their silence about safety violations, it had covered up their knowledge of the corruption James had died trying to expose. Her hands trembled as she read through the documents. James knew the risks, Edward said, his voice stronger now despite his weakening body. He told me he had to continue for Charlie's future. He said someone had to stand up for what's right. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of misplaced blame and hidden truths. Charlie, drifting in and out of consciousness, seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy. "Is this part of the story?" he asked softly. "The part where the truth makes everything better?" His innocent question brought tears to everyone's eyes, the hope in his voice contrasting sharply with his fragile condition. The nurse's evidence sparked a chain reaction. Other former employees came forward, bringing their own pieces of the puzzle. The true story of James Thompson emerged not just a safety inspector who died in an accident, but a hero who had sacrificed everything to protect others, working alongside the man his widow had blamed for years. Amelia found herself re-evaluating every interaction, every coincidence that had helped them survive. "You were there all along," she said to Edward, her voice thick with emotion. "Even when I hated you, you were trying to protect us." Edward's response was a gentle squeeze of her hand, too weak now for words, but his eyes conveying years of unspoken truth. The media narrative shifted dramatically as the evidence became public. Edward's apparent breakdown was recast as a final stand against corruption, his sacrifice for Charlie a continuation of his partnership with James. The story of three lives intertwined by tragedy and redemption captured public imagination, bringing attention to the broader issues of corporate responsibility and worker safety. The hospital room became a place of reconciliation as the full truth settled over them. Mrs. Harrison, her face lined with grief and regret, took Amelia's hands in hers. "We were wrong," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "About everything. About you, about Edward, about what James was trying to do." Amelia found her anger melting away as she understood the full scope of what had happened. Edward hadn't abandoned them, he'd been fighting for them all along, carrying the burden of James's death while trying to protect his legacy. Every anonymous gift, every timely coincidence had been his way of honoring his friend's sacrifice. Charlie, though weak, seemed to understand more than any of them. "That's why you looked so sad when you saw Mum's picture," he said to Edward during a moment of clarity. "You weren't just remembering the past, you were carrying it." His simple observation brought fresh tears to everyone's eyes. The corporate lawyers who had fought against Edward's reforms now became allies, armed with evidence of long-term corruption. The safety protocols James had died fighting for were reinstated, strengthened by Edward's final mandates. His apparent business suicide transformed into a masterstroke of corporate reform. Understanding dawned among the hospital staff as well. The nurses who had witnessed their daily struggles now saw the deeper story, not of a wealthy man's guilt, but of a promise kept to a fallen friend, of love that had never really died, of sacrifice that went beyond mere money. Edward's own medical team revised their understanding of his choices. His refusal of aggressive cancer treatment wasn't giving up, it was choosing to use his remaining time to fulfill his promise to James. Every day he stayed conscious was another day he could protect Charlie and Amelia, completing the mission he and James had started together. The photograph that had started everything Amelia under the oak tree took on new meaning. Charlie had kept it as a symbol of hope, Edward as a reminder of his promise, and Amelia as a connection to her past. Now it represented something more, a moment of innocence before fate had intertwined their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. Mrs. Harrison withdrew the custody suit formally, her voice shaking as she read a statement acknowledging Amelia's strength and dedication. "James would be proud," she said, looking at Charlie's sleeping form. "Of all of you, the words served as a bridge across years of misunderstanding and pain." Even the media began to understand, their stories shifting from scandal to legacy. Edward's transformation from corporate titan to guardian angel became a symbol of redemption. James's story emerged as one of quiet heroism, and Amelia's unwavering dedication to Charlie exemplified the power of a mother's love. In their quiet moments between medical crises, Edward and Amelia finally spoke of the past without bitterness. They shared memories of James, stories of Charlie's childhood, and their own journey from love to loss to something new, a deep understanding born of shared sacrifice and revealed truths. The first sign of change came unexpectedly. Charlie, who had been declining steadily, suddenly stabilized. The doctors couldn't explain it, but his vital signs began showing marginal improvements. It was as if the weight of secrets being lifted had somehow lightened his physical burden as well. Edward's story reached the medical community, touching hearts and opening doors. Specialists who had previously been unavailable suddenly offered consultations. Research facilities reached out with treatment options. The hospital board, moved by the unfolding story, approved experimental procedures previously deemed too risky. The Harrisons transformed from adversaries to advocates. Mrs. Harrison, channeling her grief into action, established a foundation in James's name to support families of workplace accident victims. She worked alongside Amelia, their shared love for Charlie healing old wounds and building new bridges. Public support poured in as the true story spread. Former Holt Industries employees shared stories of James's integrity and Edward's secret kindnesses. Letters arrived from families Edward had helped anonymously over the years, each one adding to the tapestry of redemption being woven around them. Charlie's art returned, tentatively at first. His new drawings featured 3 central figures: himself, his mother, and Edward, but now they included a 4th, watching over them from above. "That's Dad," he explained softly. "He sent Edward to help us when we needed it most." The simple wisdom of his words touched everyone who heard them. Edward, though growing weaker, found peace in the truth finally being known. His reputation transformed from corporate villain to silent guardian. The business world, which had condemned his apparent madness, now studied his final actions as a model of corporate responsibility and personal redemption. Amelia discovered strength she didn't know she possessed. The clarity of understanding helped her balance the past and present, honoring James's memory, while accepting the new shape her family had taken. The forgiveness of Edward, when it came, was complete and healing. The hospital became a place of hope rather than despair. Staff members who had witnessed their struggles now saw daily small victories. Charlie's room, once a space of fear and tension, filled with light and cautious optimism. Even the medical monitors seemed to beat more hopefully. Legal redemption came as investigations into James's death reopened. The corrupt board members faced justice, their crimes exposed by the evidence Edward and James had gathered. The truth set many free, though some would face consequences for their past actions. Most importantly, Charlie began to heal not just physically, but emotionally. The burden of being the center of so much conflict lifted from his young shoulders. He could focus on getting better, supported by a family that now included not just his mother, but Edward and the Harrisons as well. The photograph that had started their journey found a new home, framed alongside Charlie's artwork in his hospital room. It served as a reminder that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most meaningful destinations, and that redemption often comes in unexpected ways. Spring arrived with unexpected miracles. Charlie's recovery, though gradual, defied medical expectations. His strength returned slowly but steadily, each day bringing small victories that accumulated into significant progress. The experimental treatment, combined with his renewed spirit, began showing promising results. Edward's own battle took an unexpected turn. Though his cancer remained terminal, his decline slowed dramatically. His doctors were baffled by his resilience, but those who knew him understood he was holding on to witness Charlie's recovery, drawing strength from each small improvement in the boy's condition. The hospital room transformed into a celebration of life and healing. Charlie's artwork covered the walls, each new drawing brighter and more detailed than the last. His latest masterpiece showed their unconventional family standing beneath a blooming oak tree, with James watching over them from among the clouds. Amelia found her professional life transforming as well. The publicity surrounding their story led to opportunities she'd never imagined. Schools reached out, offering her teaching positions that would accommodate Charlie's ongoing medical needs. Her dream of becoming a teacher, once sacrificed, now seemed within reach again. The Harrisons became regular visitors, bringing warmth instead of legal threats. Mrs. Harrison and Amelia developed a friendship based on their shared love for Charlie and James's memory. Together they expanded the foundation's work, helping other families navigate similar challenges. Edward's corporate legacy underwent its own resurrection. The safety reforms he and James had fought for became industry standards. Companies across the country began adopting what became known as the Thompson-Holt protocols, ensuring worker safety took precedence over profit margins. Charlie's recovery milestones were celebrated by an ever-growing extended family. Each achievement, from his first steps without assistance to his return to drawing, became a moment of shared joy. The hospital staff, who had witnessed their darkest hours, joined in their celebrations with genuine happiness. The media narrative completed its transformation. What had begun as a scandal became a story of redemption, love, and the power of truth. Edward's sacrifice was recognized not as a businessman's breakdown, but as a final act of loyalty to a friend and dedication to a promise. Most significantly, Charlie began to thrive. His medical readings improved consistently, his energy returned, and his natural optimism blazed brighter than ever. The doctors began discussing discharge plans, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence as his progress continued. Edward, though confined to his wheelchair, found peace in watching Charlie's recovery. His own time was limited, but he had accomplished what mattered most, ensuring Charlie's future and honoring James's memory. His relationship with Amelia evolved into a deep friendship built on shared experiences and mutual understanding. The photograph that had started their journey was joined by new ones: Charlie playing in the hospital garden, Amelia teaching at his bedside, Edward sharing story time with both of them. These images told a story of healing that went beyond physical recovery, touching the hearts of all who witnessed it. The day Charlie was discharged from the hospital marked the beginning of their new life. Edward had arranged for a house near the hospital, its ground floor modified for both Charlie's recovery and his own declining health. The home's large windows filled every room with natural light, and the garden offered a perfect space for Charlie's continuing rehabilitation. Amelia's first day as a full-time teacher coincided with Charlie's return home. The local school had created a special position for her, allowing her to teach while maintaining flexibility for Charlie's medical appointments. Her classroom quickly became known for its emphasis on art and storytelling, inspired by Charlie's journey. The Harrisons became regular fixtures in their lives, Sunday dinners becoming a tradition where stories of James were shared and celebrated. Mrs. Harrison, now Grandma Rose, to Charlie, took particular joy in helping him tend the garden, planting flowers that would bloom year after year as a symbol of their renewed family bonds. Edward's remaining time became precious moments of joy rather than countdown to loss. Though increasingly confined to his bed, he continued sharing stories with Charlie, their imagination transforming his bedroom into fantastic landscapes of adventure. His corporate knowledge found a new purpose as he tutored Charlie in math and science, turning complex concepts into engaging puzzles. The foundation they had established grew beyond their expectations. Other families facing similar challenges found support and hope through their program. Charlie, despite his young age, became an inspiration to other children, his artwork and stories sharing messages of courage and perseverance. Their house became a gathering place for an extended family that transcended blood ties. Hospital staff who had cared for Charlie stopped by regularly, bringing updates about other patients and sharing in their continuing story. The community that had formed around them during their darkest days remained steadfast in their support. Charlie's recovery progressed steadily. His regular checkups became celebrations of progress rather than moments of anxiety. The doctors who had once given grave prognoses now spoke of long-term plans and future possibilities. His art therapy sessions evolved into real art classes, his talent flourishing alongside his health. Amelia found unexpected joy in merging her past and present. Teaching allowed her to honor both James's memory and Edward's support, while creating her own legacy of helping others. Her students, especially those facing challenges, found inspiration in her story of perseverance and love. Edward's impact continued through the changes he had implemented. The safety protocols he and James had fought for saved lives daily, their shared vision of corporate responsibility becoming a model for others to follow. His final business achievement wasn't measured in profits, but in lives improved and protected. The garden became a special place of healing and remembrance. Charlie insisted on planting an oak tree, similar to the one in the photograph that had brought them together. Beneath its growing branches, they placed a bench where they could sit, share stories, and watch new life flourish. And their home became known in the neighborhood as a place of warmth and welcome. Other families facing medical challenges found their way there, drawn by the story of hope and healing it represented. Charlie's artwork covered the walls, each piece telling part of their journey from darkness to light. Edward's final days were filled with unexpected peace. As autumn painted the garden in golden hues, he gathered his family for one last conversation beneath the young oak tree. Charlie sat close, holding his hand, while Amelia arranged blankets against the cooling air. "Life gives us second chances," Edward began softly. Not always in the ways we expect. He looked at Charlie, then at Amelia, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to find what truly matters." The oak leaves rustled above them, as if James himself were listening. Charlie presented Edward with a final drawing, a portrait of all of them, including James, standing together beneath the oak tree. At the bottom, he'd written in careful letters, "Family isn't just blood, it's love that never gives up." The simple wisdom of his words captured everything they'd learned through their journey. Amelia shared her own revelation, speaking of how their story had taught her that forgiveness isn't just about letting go of the past, but about making space for new beginnings. "James sent us you," she told Edward, "to finish what you both started, not just fixing the company, but healing our hearts." The foundation they'd established would continue their work, supporting families facing similar challenges. Charlie, despite his young age, understood its importance. "We're helping other people write their happy endings," he explained, showing wisdom beyond his years. Edward's final gift was a letter to be read after his passing, but he shared its essence with them that day. "True wealth," he said, looking at his transformed family, "isn't measured in dollars or power. It's measured in the lives we touch, the love we share, and the legacy we leave behind." The garden would remain their special place, where memories of both James and Edward would live on in blooming flowers and growing trees. Charlie insisted they plant daisies because they always face the sun, just like we learn to look for light in dark times. Their story spread, touching others with its message of hope, redemption, and the power of unconditional love. Not as a fairy tale of magical cures, but as a testament to the strength of human spirit and the healing power of truth and forgiveness. In his final moments, Edward watched Charlie and Amelia through his window, tending the garden together. Their laughter carried on the autumn breeze, a sound that meant more to him than all the business successes of his past. He'd found his redemption not in grand gestures, but in the simple act of loving and being loved in return. Charlie's last words to Edward captured the essence of their journey. "You weren't just my Christmas friend," he said, hugging him gently. "You became my everyday angel." The words, simple yet profound, summed up how love had transformed them all. The photograph of Amelia under the oak tree, where their story began, found a new home beside Charlie's family portrait. Together they told a story of how pain can lead to healing, how loss can lead to finding, and how the end of one chapter can become the beginning of another, more beautiful one. Thank you for joining us for this heartwarming story of love, redemption, and second chances. If this tale touched your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content that inspires and moves people. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What touched you most about this story? Have you experienced similar moments of forgiveness and redemption in your life? We'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to share this video with friends and family who might need a reminder that it's never too late for second chances and that love can heal even the deepest wounds. Hit that subscribe button to stay updated with more touching stories that remind us of the power of human connection and the beauty of forgiveness. Together, let's spread hope and inspire others through the power of storytelling.